1000x bread on base calls as a hedge for the housing market. That sounds really smart. Make sure I got my Zoom ready. This is Melody Wright, an expert on the U.S. housing market. I found your Substack a few months back, and I found it to be like a real breath of fresh air, a real insightful look at what's actually going on, because it feels like the housing market is incomprehensible. I don't understand why it does what it does, but I would love if you could help explain it to a wider audience. And I almost don't know where to start because it's such a big, intractable number of questions. So I thought I'd start with this. There's a graph. U.S. first-time homebuyers is now reached the record age of 40 years old. This is what I think is driving a lot of nihilism and disillusionment. The opportunities to get a house that were available for those older than them are no longer still around.
Maybe so I should just start with kind of like a brief history of how we got here.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And it really started before I got in mortgage. It started really with women joining the workforce in the 70s because they had to. Before then, you could see that home prices tracked household median income just like this, barely any movement.
Okay.
And then as women started joining the workforce, you also had divorce rates going up. And so you kind of had something driving household formation that you really hadn't had before, like families splitting up. Then comes the 80s when they start doing these securitizations where if you've watched The Big Short, and if anybody has not seen that movie, they really need to see it, but they package up the mortgages, they sell those bonds off. And this really drove a different kind of sort of activity in the mortgage market. It became about a big part of it, even back in the 80s, was about investment. And so from there, you start seeing kind of this low interest rate. Sort of every time we got into trouble, right, we would see these lower interest rates, and even the Fed would start buying mortgage-backed securities. That happened after the GFC. But even before then, you basically saw that whoever was in power would use the housing market to restart the economy after a cycle had ended, trying to get every Tom, Dick, and Harry into the housing market.
Right. I just want to make sure I want to restate to make sure I understand. So every time we got into any economic turmoil, the government, left or right, would cut interest rates, stimulate, even go as far as, buying mortgage-backed securities, printing money. And that led to the increasing housing prices.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
And, in the early 2000s, it truly was, I think, a lot of families that were buying. But at the same time, you also had investors participating, buying up second homes, for either vacation or to do long-term rental. And, that's kind of a good way to make passive income. So we hit, 2008. Most people misunderstand that crisis. Subprime was really a small portion of the market. What ultimately caused our global financial crisis, some people call it, is a lack of confidence and collateral in these big securitization derivative markets. And so one day, Chase no longer would take Lehman's pledged assets, and then the whole sort of market fell apart.
So they just panic? It's a panic.
It's panic. It's a confidence game. And what we need to understand too, for historical perspective, is that the shadow markets, where is where those derivatives trade in that off balance sheet securitization market, that is now much larger than it was back then. So let's keep that in.
Can I ask? So I talked with Steve Eisman, actually, of The Big Short. Yes. We did an interview, and he mentioned some of this, which is that the rules changed for banks after the great financial crisis to add some regulation, but then all of the shady lending just went off the bank's balance sheets onto these private lenders.
That's not where it all went. It went onto the balance sheet of the government sponsored agency.
So if I'm a private lender and you want to buy a house, and so I don't do a proper credit check or whatever, I give you more money than you can probably afford, then I can flip that and sell that back to the government, so there's no risk on my balance sheet. Is that what you're saying?
In that scenario, you're giving more agency to that lender than they actually have. You're just kind of the person checking the boxes to make sure that it fits into their box. So basically what happened is the government stepped into where the private market was previously in that subprime, and that's government subprime. It's called FHA. This program used to be about those first-time home buyers that you're showing there. But it went off the rails, and pretty much anybody can use it if they claim that they're going to occupy that home. This is what's so crazy, is that FHA before the last cycle was about 7% of the market. It's now almost doubled. It's between 13 and 15% of the market, and it's already over 10% delinquent. But why isn't everybody screaming about this? Because 2024 was an election year, and the current administration wanted to win that election. And so they did one of the craziest loss mitigation programs I've ever seen. What they did is these loan modifications where you come in, you can say, "Hey, I can't make this payment." And they say, "Okay, I'll work with you. We'll see how we can change some of the loan terms so that you can actually get a
This
lower
is
payment."
this is wild to hear because I did an interview with Bill Moreland. You ever heard of
Oh, I
him?
love Bill.
Bill Moreland. He
Love
told me
Bill.
the same
Yes.
thing about
Yeah.
other aspects that the banks are doing, where they're
100%.
modifying all of
100%.
these commercial real estate loans,
Correct.
these auto
Correct.
loans.
Correct.
And they're just
Yep.
extending and pretending.
Extending and
Okay.
pretending.
If you do feel like you've gotten yourself on some sort of stable ground, you're saying that you think the people that have gambled incorrectly on the housing are going to lose money on it, and it is going to get cheaper, and there is going to be ability to get a house.
Absolutely.
All right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
And that is the good news.
the idea that these housing prices are sustainable is pretty crazy. I didn't pay my car for like 2 months and then started paying like normal. They don't seem to care at all. Yeah, they're just not calling it in, bro. You have one of these houses. You bought it for $750,000, and you're the last person to buy in this neighborhood, which means based on comps, the average housing price here is $750K. Everybody in this neighborhood feels like, maybe this guy bought it at 500. Now it's 750 because when you bought it. Like the last sold house in the neighborhood sort of sets the price. So everybody feels like they have a ton of money. Now, if one person cracks and sells as prices fall, as there is no demand, this person has to move. This person has a divorce. This person has to sell. And they sell for $450K. Now that's the new last comp. Now all of a sudden these are marked down. That's the idea. And then once you're underwater, once you have a $450K house, but you're paying like a $700K mortgage, a lot of people abandon this is what happens in the GFC. People start stopping their payments. They stop paying, they default, they leave the house, which causes more sales, which causes the prices to go down. It's a reverse doom loop. There's going to be opportunities for, I think, good houses at more realistic prices.